World War II. They occupied Germany, Berlin, parts of the German, and they never left. Like, it's very simple. They invaded those places. Even Berlin was invaded, and normally after World War II, all the parties, allies will just leave, and a separate Germany will be established. But they never left. They hold all the territories: Lithuania, Estonia, Lithuania. All those countries were part of the Soviet Union, and even Ukraine was part of that Soviet Union, because on the first agreement when Lenin annexed Ukraine and those territories, the agreement was that they were sovereign states, which never exist. And this is a general practice of Russian empire over the years as well. Like, if you look at the southwest of China, northeast of China, that's where the Russians invaded back in the 19th centuries, and they still occupy those lands, and majority of the population is non-Russian. The majority of the population where Russian is only the Muscovy area. The other parts of Russia is non-Russian people. The population is not growing. It's a corrupted country, and the only way to keep stability in the country is to invade Ukraine, put a totalitarian regime, increase the number of people, and I think the Western countries should never give up on Ukraine, because once they give up, it will show to other countries or other occasions that yes, you have NATO or Western countries until a certain while on your back, but they will not stand with you all the time. So no matter what, even if it takes the nuclear arsenal, I think the NATO or Western countries should stand with Ukraine no matter what it takes.
I'm just going to push back. I don't think we should do a nuclear arsenal, and we're already aware that multiple countries are actually going to ask for an end, and most likely that there is going to be a division within Ukraine in terms of a settlement or a peace accord. So, I mean, that whole, we should stand until nuclear Armageddon comes, I'm not sure I'm for that, and I'm sure for pretty much 90% of the world is not for that. And I don't think any nation really wants to provoke that. Most assuredly, the Ukrainian people and most of Europe does not want to see that happen in their backyard. So I don't know. And the commitments that you have now, again, like I said earlier, it's already been reported by multiple nations. There is a limit coming, and the end for these massive aid packages and ongoing support is coming to a close. So, like, Zelensky and the Ukrainian people need to do whatever they're going to do. They need to accomplish it within the next few months in order to have their stance before there's going to be a cut down, and they better learn to negotiate a peaceful resolution, because what they don't want to do is be on the bad end of that stick, and that's where your politics will come into play. And Peter, you can correct me if you think I'm wrong.
If your country's occupied, how can you negotiate peace?
I don't know. Maybe you can still negotiate something.
Had to do that. Can I say something? I've noticed that, and I'm not saying I agree with the Russian invasion, or Russia isn't guilty of some maybe stirring the pot, so to speak. But we have to go away from the whole, the evil Russia has come in, and none of the Ukrainians at all want anything to do with Russia. When there was a conflict, basically, and according to the UN, 14,000 people died in the separatism in eastern Ukraine, and the Ukrainian armies continued bombardment from 2014 all the way to now, and shellings. And I even saw a video in which one Ukrainian soldier, about a couple months ago, I believe, basically to his chagrin was saying the locals don't like us. They treat us like foreigners. And I want to know is what part of that conflict, was it stirred up by the Russians, or is it true that they were being oppressed a little bit like the people in Catalan, did Spain, or the people in America, us Americans that, got independence from Britain? Like, to what degree? Because it didn't start within 2022. There was massive shelling, there was massive resistance in eastern Ukraine.
Yeah,
so can anyone speak to that?
I can speak to that. So X, I think if what you're referring to is what I think you're referring to. I'm not aware of it being 14,000, but my stats go back to about 6-7 months ago, so maybe it's gotten to be more. But the last stat I had was that there were 10,000 people who had died over a 7-year period, or a 6-year period, and of the 10,000 people, 7,000 were soldiers. That, over a period of 7 years, is basically a low-boil, simmering conflict, and it's actually pretty common. It's unfortunate, but it's very common to have, 25, 30, even 40% of the people in a conflict who die being civilians. It's...
You mean being soldiers?
I'm sorry?
I said, you mean being soldiers?
No, what I'm saying is it's very common to have 70%, 60%, 55 to 70% of the casualties in a conflict be soldiers and 25, 30% be civilians. That is very, very common. And so what you're talking, and when these stats are shared, they're usually shared, depending on where you got them, from like Al Jazeera, or they're shared by Chinese media, or they're shared by RT.com or Iranian media, and they usually will ignore the Ukrainian casualties, and they'll pretend like all the casualties were all civilians, which isn't the case. That particular conflict, again, was started because Russia invaded an area which is sovereign Ukrainian territory. The Ukrainian people are a people. The Ukrainian state has borders. Russia violated those borders under the pretext that, Russian speakers in Ukraine are being oppressed, which is preposterous. We just had a person on this stage talk about how they're a Russian speaker in Ukraine, and there are so many Russian speakers in Ukraine. Most of Ukraine speaks Russian fluently or to a very comfortable extent. And there are ethnic Russians living in Ukraine. There's ethnic Ukrainians living in Russia. There isn't a ethnic oppression of Russian speakers in that region. It's just false, right? And so when Russia invaded that area, bottom line is that when Russia invaded that area, right, it violated the Budapest Memorandum, right? It violated Ukrainian sovereignty. And yes, of course, Ukraine engaged in conflict to protect its territory. That's natural.
And
can I say something?
Okay, yeah, so you guys, hold on, everybody. You guys just, let's make sure, if you've already spoken, try to make some space for people who haven't. I think there are a lot of people that want to speak, but go ahead. Whoever was trying to speak, if you haven't.
In World War II, we had 80 million died, and one of the reasons France and UK went to war against Germany was the Poland invasion. And at that time, they did not say we can stand until a certain point, and we have to stand with you guys until the end, and which happened, and we don't have Hitler anymore. So I think that's one of the reasons the Western world should stand with Ukraine until the final point.
Let me speak to Gabriel, because I wanted to give him an out.
Give it to him. You don't have to prep it.
Yeah, he's talking about that it's the invasion. That conflict has been going on since 2014, intermittently, 2015, 2016, 2017, of the back and forth.
Yeah, that was the first Russian invasion. Yeah, exactly.
So you're saying they invaded? You're saying they helped the separatists?
That's right. Russia invaded that area.
That's right.
Correct.
But where is that? It wasn't a formal invasion. I mean, it wasn't 2022.
It's called asymmetrical warfare, X. So what the Russians did was to help stimulate separatist feeling. Ukraine. They used the basis that historically speaking, Russian Empire control.
Peter, you're in the matrix. Give it a second. Who else is trying to jump in?
Yeah, I'll just say, they didn't invade with their army, but they, sent people to support it or sent advisors or did the same kind of thing the U.S. does with the CIA all the time.
They changed. They had people with anonymous uniforms, non-Russian uniforms.
Little green
in squads. Yeah, the little green men and all that.
Green men. So as I was trying to say before, the Russians basically orchestrated a false flag operation, which was basically that there has always been a subtle, not very large, but still disruption with Eastern Ukraine, because historically Eastern and Southern Ukraine have been part of the Russian Empire. It's known as Novorossiya. If you look up Novorossiya, Novorussiia, you'll see a part of Ukraine that was controlled by Russia. So that means that the language, the ethnicity, although both are pretty similar in ethnicity, was more affiliated with Russia. And so Putin and other people who like to revise history use this as a basis by which to justify that they're coming to the defense of Russians in this part of Ukraine because they're at risk from the nasty Nazi Ukrainian government. But what happened really was that the Russians helped to supply some very hardline and separatist individuals in eastern Ukraine, and then when the Ukrainians launched their own voluntary defensive groups, which is where this Azov battalion and rather neo-Nazi-esque people came from, because they were some of the most hardline on the Ukrainian side to defend Ukraine, the Russians just decided, screw it, we're going to send in our own people, but we'll take off the insignias, we'll take off anything that associates with the Russian military, and therefore it won't, the Western world, the international community won't be able to directly claim that it was us. And what's happened since then is you've had a pocketed bit of conflict happening in eastern Ukraine, which the Russians have basically wanted to undertake as a full-scale invasion, but they decided not to, for reasons to do with sanctions, to do with the timing just not being right for the economy, because they were, quotation marks, acknowledging the Minsk Accords, and so on and so forth. But largely speaking, this was orchestrated by the Russians with individuals in Ukraine, and then eventually they decided to just go at the whole hog and do it. So that's largely what the context.
I understand.
Sorry. Excuse me. I want to say I'm Russian, but I'm living in Europe. I'm living in Italy. So I want to say only one thing. I grew up in Armenia. I grew up in Azerbaijan and Georgia. Between Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan right now, there is very, very big war. But in people, in television, I don't know English, sorry, doesn't say nothing about this. I am so sad because my boyfriend just like 3 days going to war. Everyone speak about Russia, about Ukraine, but about this war doesn't speak no one. Because there is not oil, there is not petrol, benzene, gas, everything. So America, Russia, other countries doesn't interest in this war. They don't speak about this, like about Afghanistan and even another country. Thank you.
I'll make a point, and I'll probably go to the audience. My point is this, look, in the U.S., it's very divisive. So to your point, sis, whether or not you Russian, you black, you white, whatever you want to be, everybody's an enemy. Nobody's your friend. It's so sad. It's very divisive in this country. Everybody's a racist. Everybody's a bigot. Everybody's a homophobe. Everybody's transphobic. It's fucking ridiculous. So hey, vote to America, the land of the free, the home of the disenfranchised. Everybody's just competing to be like who's disenfranchised more. And quite frankly, Clubhouse is a microcosm of shitty ideology. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, LJ.
I would probably argue that the U.S. isn't supporting Ukraine enough, because when you look at the RAND documents and other corporate type think tanks, a lot of the ideology is to give Russia and Afghanistan, so to speak, or to make a war the war very long. That's why the Rand documents recently released something against a long war, whether they thought Ukraine would lose. But before that, they wanted it to win long term because when we look at these missile strikes that Russia keeps bombarding, I mean, the whole point of the U.S. being either the world's policeman or a very powerful superpower is to stop precisely things happening exactly like that. And America is not being able to do so. So either it doesn't want to, or its equipment is inferior, or it is some degree
There's a couple of things.
scared of Russia.
There's a couple of things. So one, the comparison between Afghanistan and Ukraine and Russia is very different. The war in Ukraine is a kinetic warfare involving a big
Hey, LJ, hold on. Piotr started first, but also I couldn't even tell you were talking because it's like cutting out your voice. So legitimately, just let him finish, then you can.
Sorry, I couldn't even hear him. We need to distinguish between different types of warfare, right? So what was Afghanistan? That was a coalition of various Western powers going into a country which is known as the graveyard of empires, because the Soviets, the British, a few others have tried to go in there to, control or direct the future of Afghanistan and failed.